Mitchell. Neal, he's going to share an incredible testimony of how Jesus Christ changed his life. There's hope in Jesus Christ.
Yes, there is.
And he changed my life, Richie's, and another one of our interviewees here, Neal Mitchell. So I brought you on here so that you can give us a little testimony of what your life was like before you became a Christian.
Sure. So I grew up in what I consider, the stereotypical American family. I originally grew up in Northern California, in Santa Rosa, California, Sonoma County. Played all the regular sports growing up, baseball, basketball. For the most part, up until about 10, 11 years old, my life was, pretty average, I would consider, right? But unfortunately, like most stereotypical American families, nowadays, my family became, involved in a lot of turmoil as a result of my parents getting a divorce. And it was pretty messy, typically they're never good, right? But, my siblings and I were thrown right in the middle of it. And so, from that point in time, my life was marked by a lot of, hatred and bitterness and, growing up very dark and having a lot of questions as far as, who I was and, really not having much of an identity, as seeing the identity of your parents, really splitting, that typically has a huge impact on your life. So, so growing up, was pretty average at first, but then, took a turn for the worse, if I could categorize my life in one term, it would be purposeless.
Wow.
I really did feel like completely purposeless in my life. That came as one of the ramifications of that was when I was 14 years old, I actually came very close to committing suicide. My dad had, guns in the house. I remember sitting at the edge of my parents' house, or my parents' bed in their house one day when it was completely empty with a gun in my hand, really contemplating whether or not, I'd kill myself. And to me, my thought at that point was, well, this is all my life is amounted to is turmoil, is depression. If all I am is just you're born, you live, and you die. I'm time plus matter plus chance. Then what's the point? What's the point of me living? My viewpoint was I was handed a bad card in life. Right, my life was the result of other people's decisions. My parents, my family, having self-pity for myself, and so. The thing that actually kept me from doing it, committing suicide at that point was a voice in me just said, what if there's a heaven and what if there's a hell and you die and go to hell? Wow. And I sat there and I really thought, mind you, I had no concept of God or eternity or anything at that point. And I thought, well, if I do end up going to hell, I'm thinking, I can't do it. So put the gun away and I never went down that road. So through the course of time, I ended up moving out to Arizona. After my parents split, decided to go with my dad. My dad wanted to come out to this place called Prescott, Arizona. I, went from, more or less a metropolitan to, a 10-acre ranch, right? And so I figured when I come out to Arizona, things are going to be different. I won't be picked on anymore. I won't be this dark, depressed person, but it followed me. I was exactly the same person. I was categorized as being emo or gothic. I had, dark hair all the way down to my shoulders. I fit in a lot with like the dark metal, death metal groups and stuff like that. And so I'm thinking, something's not right here, right? My self-esteem wasn't within me, it was within other people and what people thought of me. So, I figured, people don't like this image of me. So, I cut my hair, put a polo shirt on and fit right in with the party scene. And my life became all about partying and alcoholism and just being the life of a party. And I loved it. And I clung to that lifestyle, that acceptance through that lifestyle, even though it was wanton, it was empty just as much. It was still to hide the fact that there was something so very wrong inside of me, right? And so, wow. But even at that time, although suicide not being in the question, I still, pondered it. I was still very dark and depressed. I experimented with cutting myself and really just filled my life with just alcoholism was the biggest thing for me. I loved to just get drunk and just party and just forget about the worries that I had, the problems that I had going on in my life. And even to the point where, there was a part of me that really did search for purpose. Because again, like I said, my life was marred by the fact and the thought of purposelessness. Just completely purposeless. I'm thinking, is this it? You're born, you live, you die. This is it. If this is all there is in life, then this kind of stinks, right? It's kind of dealt a bad hand, in my opinion. So I experimented with cutting myself, and I researched different religions and looked at, what do Buddhists believe, what do Satanists believe, and stuff like that. And luckily, never got involved in some of those things. But I researched them to try to learn what they were, because there was something deeply inside of me that was missing. I just didn't know what it was.
Wow.
So I just kept trying to fill it with, worldly things.
Wow, Neal, that's quite a story. So, by the time you were a young man, you were in a really dark place.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, where's the light at the end of the tunnel here, Neal?
So for me, it came when I was 17 years old. It didn't happen immediately. I had a friend of mine. Actually, it wasn't even a friend of mine. It was a classmate in a choir class. Amidst all of my background, I ended up in a choir class. I love music. Always loved music. So he pulled me into we had these practice rooms where you'd go in there and just like have private sessions and stuff like that. And I was back there. I don't even remember what I was doing. And his name was Brian, and he came in one day and he just sat me down and he goes,
love that guy.
And he just asked me a very profound question that is so simple, yet nobody had ever asked me. People ask you how your day is, people ask you what you're involved in, how's it going. People really don't know or care what they're asking you. He came in and very deliberately asked me, how's your life going? Right? Wow. And so up until that point, I didn't think my dad, who was around at the time, really had even asked me that question, in a very long time. How are you doing? Like, honestly, how's your life? He literally asked that. How is your life going? It's a very simple question. I said, my life is, it's not going very well, right?
Wow. Brian witnessed to me in high school.
Really?
He asked me something similar.
That's crazy.
He asked me a little bit about my background and my lifestyle, and it was really clear what I was into when I was in high school. And
right.
He's a good guy. What a testimony.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Neal, right now, you're a family man, you have an education. Who would have thought that you came from a place that was such a struggle?
Yeah, no, my life has changed a lot, so just one aspect of that would be, I got a master's degree from Arizona State University back in 2017.
Congratulations.
So thank you. So I went down the educational route. I'm a IT security consultant for Banner Health, and then I'm also an adjunct professor for both Yale College and Embry-Riddle. From going from the lowly beginnings of high school and in the that dark, very dark stage, to converting into something where I've pursued things now where I actually have a more or less a future, that type of thing. So it's something I definitely always hungered for and longed for when I was younger, even as a teenager. Was my life's got to amount to something, right? I want to. It wasn't so much to show people what who I was and what I could do at that point. It was more so just I want to do something. I kind of want to do something with my life. More
somewhere along the line, you found a purpose and you found hope.
Mm-hmm.
And I know obviously now that you're a Christian man. Tell me how you met Jesus.
So when I was in high school, that guy you alluded to, Brian Dubois, he came up to me in high school, during one of our classes, and in the back we had these practice rooms, right? So he came up to me and he asked me that question. He said, "How's your life going?" He goes, "How's your life? How's life going?" And pardon my words, but I actually said, "My life sucks." Wow. Is actually what I said. My life stinks. Right? I hate my life. Everything I do is a cover for what is wrong. There's something seriously broken and wrong inside of me, and I didn't know what it was, and so I just kept filling it with, different things. I know it's so stereotypical for people to say that, right? You have a God-shaped hole in your heart. It really is the truth. I knew there was something wrong. I just didn't know what it was, and I didn't know where to find it. So I always searched for all these worldly things, relationships and alcohol, dabbling in drugs, cutting myself. Maybe it's different religions and things of that nature, and nothing fulfilled. Nothing I did ever felt like it filled that gap. And so he asked me that question, and it was profound. And he told me two things that stuck with me that day. He said, "I want you to know that Jesus Christ loves you and has a plan for your life, and I want you to know that I care about where you spend eternity." And that was profound for my life at that point, because at that point, nobody, even family members, nobody had ever shared with me, ever shared a moment that they were like, hey, I care about you, what are you going through? Nobody. I'm not saying that for self-pity. It's the truth. Nobody was around to, I was pretty much on my own for the most part, no parental, oversight or guidance at that point in my life. And so I got to run amok and do whatever the heck I wanted, right? So he shared that with me. He ended up bringing me to a couple music scenes very similar to the 180 when it was called The Underground. And I actually remember the music, one of the bands, After Madness at the time, right? I actually loved the music because I always came from a real hard rock metal background, right? So when I heard that music, initially I was drawn by the music, but then I really started getting captivated by the lyrics. And so he brought me to church during a Roman Gutierrez revival. And then that's where I heard the gospel and ended up getting saved then, on a Thursday night, of that week.
What year?
It was 2007.
Wow, so it's been over, 12 years?
Yeah, just about. Yeah, a little over 12 years. To think back at where my life was and the mentality I had of, my outlook on life was really dark. It was full of hatred and bitterness towards other people, because my viewpoint at the time was, if you had a good life, well then you got lucky in life. And I was what? Unlucky? I mean, my life is terrible because I'm unlucky. I didn't do anything, so why did my life end up like this? So now knowing that there is a purpose for my life, that God, I can have a relationship with God that has completely changed who I am. It's given me an identity. Before, as I mentioned before, I didn't have identity. I didn't have self-esteem because I didn't know who I was in anybody, especially your parents. You get your identity through your parents, right? And so when I didn't have that, God ultimately is a father to the fatherless, more or less. That's how I felt. And so coming into contact with God and having that relationship completely changed my life from, the darkness, almost verbatim the darkness, right? I used to dress very dark, listen to very dark things, have very dark viewpoints. Yeah, self-mutilation and, alcoholism and stuff like that, to the light, and things that are good and things that God loves, that becomes your identity. No longer do you desire, those things of the world that I used to pursue. Now it's the things that God wants for my life that I pursue now.
So Jesus Christ gave you an identity, he gave you purpose, and he delivered you from that dark path. He lifted you up.
Absolutely. And that was a key term, for me that I cling to a lot, is the term purpose. I don't know about other people, but that is the word that really always stuck with me, was I'm purposeless. And that tormented my life, was just, I'm purposeless. I mean, my life has got to amount to something. Maybe it's just my type A personality, which I guess is kind of, evident through education and career and stuff like that. But it's just, my life has to amount to something. Not even amount in a worldly sense. It's kind of matter. There's going to be something out there, right? I mean, substance. Yeah, it's just, my life has got to matter for something. I mean, is this it? I mean, because if this is it, then I got a bum deal, right? Then suicide was an answer. But God having given me that purpose, through, the gift of salvation that he gives us through Jesus Christ. When I bowed my knee and said that prayer, in April of 2007, God became real at that moment. It wasn't just a mantra. It wasn't a process. It wasn't anything I could have done or not done. It was, submitting my life and committing my life to God, and he entered my life and completely changed it. It wasn't like, oh yeah, it took a little time to kind of get rid of some things, but for the most part, it was day and night. In fact, Brian, when we were in high school, we had a friend her name was Sparky, and I think her name was Stephanie, but we always called her Sparky. And she actually came up to Brian one day and said, "What's up with Neal?" And I didn't know this till years later, so not self-glorification here, but she came up and said, "What's up with Neal?" Because people knew me. I mean, I was, I was, even though I may have not dressed as dark as I did towards towards getting saved there, I was still a very dark person and very foul-mouthed and and things. And she actually asked Brian, she goes, "What happened to Neal?"
Evident changes.
And he said he got saved. That's all he had to say was he got saved. And it was night and day.
Tell me, what's the 180 mean to you?
So for me, it's two things. One, it represents a ministry, that, is a method and a vehicle for us to be able to reach people with the gospel. If you think about it, most people, like myself, and you might even attest to this a little bit, you don't really hear the gospel or the message of, the gospel through going to church. Right, when I was involved in sin and my life was going through a lot of turmoil, I never once thought, what, maybe I should go to church, right? Maybe I should research Satanism, maybe I should drink some more alcohol, man. I'm thinking crazy, man. What church? What are you talking about? I don't belong in church. You've seen me, right? And so that, 180, as a ministry provides us a method or vehicle to be able to, draw people in with the music, and then we captivate them by the lyrics, right? That's what happened to me in high school. Brian brought a band in that played, and I was drawn in by, the hard rock. I was like, hey, this is kind of cool. And then I slowly began to hear the message, and that is really what began to plant the seed in my heart. But then secondly, for me, 180, more so than a ministry, is also, a symbol, a metaphor for what it represents in our lives of, salvation and grace, because repentance It means to change our mind. It means to literally go the opposite direction. My life was going one direction, down a path of destruction and turmoil and purposelessness, and ultimately going to lead me down a path of death, possibly suicide. When I came into contact with the gospel and received salvation, it was a mind change. I no longer desired to go that direction anymore. I did a 180. I repented and changed my mind and agreed with God with what my life was and what my sin was. And when I did that, it was an immediate change. And no longer did I desire to want to go back to my old life. I look back sometimes and think of, my wife has sometimes asked the questions, right? Maybe your wife asks this question sometimes, where do you think you'd be if you didn't get saved? Or where do you think you'd be if you didn't get married? I told her, I said I'd either be a drug addict or I would have joined the military, something like that. And I look at that thinking, man, what a life God has not only delivered me to, but what a life God has saved me from.
Nice.
That's what 180, represents for me.
How encouraging. There you have it. You heard Neal's story. There is hope in Jesus Christ. Thank you for coming out, Neal. We really appreciate your time.
Appreciate you having me, man.
Yeah, thanks, Neal, man.
Anytime.
Awesome.
See you later, buddy.
Let's see it.